I know what you've done. Don't try to hide it from me. I know your internet browser looks exactly like this. You know dozens of applicants' GPA and MCAT scores. Not only that, you know what they were involved in. And after reading dozens of what are my chances threads, you've done your expert analysis and have concluded that you have a chance of about negative 350% of getting into medical school. I mean, what chances do you really have if there's a 4.0 GPA, 527 MCAT students who graduated from Johns Hopkins with 3 majors in 3 years and 8 publications? That student's real. Well, friends, I'm here to tell you today that you're right. It's time to wrap it up. The shop's closed. It's not too late to become a professional poker player. Now, if these stats threads weren't enough, you've also read hundreds of personal statements that are available online now. You realize that should you even be a doctor if you weren't involved in a medical emergency when you were 5 years old? You didn't have a superhero redemption story, and because of that, you're not going to stand out. Again, professional poker. But you're strong-willed. You wouldn't have gone this far if you weren't. You're looking for your ticket in, and after scrolling for hours, you come across Joe Schmo, the kid with a 3.94 GPA, 522 MCAT, applied to 30 schools, got 7 interview invites. You know everything about his application cycle. Couldn't get in with those stats. So how can you, a 3.85 student from measly UCLA, get into any medical school? All right, we're done with the skit. That's a very strong GPA, by the way, don't get me wrong. Let me be clear, I'm not shaming you. Medical school admissions is a very high stakes process, so it's only natural that you're gonna go and do your research. Chances are, they don't teach you this in school, and the counselors that you have at your disposal probably don't have all the answers that you need. And so we do what all of us do. We go straight towards the internet to look for the answer amidst the god that is Google. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of great information on Google, but it's buried amidst all the other overwhelmingly neurotic and negative information. Even worse, amidst all of that information, it's just things that aren't true. Now, I'm not saying that there's this secret Premed ninja that's out to get you, but it is hard for someone to tell you the objective truth when they're just one of the 50,000 pre-meds that apply to medical school each year, when they're just one of the medical students of 180 medical schools in the nation. And so even with the most wholehearted intentions, there's just no way that one person or even a small group of people can capture what admissions will look like for you. Now, if you've gone to this point in the video and you just don't know what Student Doctor Network is, or SDN, here's a friendly reminder from a writer named Ryan Fan. This article is titled How to Troll on Student Doctor Network to Make Premeds Feel Insignificant. The article shares 10 different ways that premeds put other students down on SDN. Here are my favorites. We'll explore some of them just out of pure entertainment value, but we'll also tell you the truth behind some of the things that these trolls are saying. Number 1, less than a 3.8 GPA, you're doomed. Tell them that there are so many other applicants that are better qualified and that a 3.8 GPA isn't good at all. What's more, they should feel ashamed about themselves and go into basket weaving instead. Number 2, brag about your acceptances and your interviews. Now, if you're looking to score some more points, the earlier you brag on SDN, the more points you earn. Max points for people who brag in July, before any acceptances or interviews are even allowed to be sent out. Here's Ryan again. In the time before any interviews or acceptances are even sent out this cycle, send a message claiming that you got an acceptance, even multiple full ride scholarships, even if the existence of those scholarships are impossible. Number 3, and my personal favorite, being accepted to too many medical schools. Start a thread genuinely lamenting the fact that you got into too many medical schools and that the decision is going to be torture. That you're trapped in medical school hell, deciding between Harvard and Stanford, Hopkins and UCSF, UCLA and Penn. After all, you can only choose one. That's going to be a hard decision. Give a list of the extremely prestigious medical schools that you allegedly got into. University of Chicago, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Duke. Then show how agonized you are, that you have no idea which school to choose from, and make a joke about how the difficult choice might cause you to not attend medical school at all. Relish in the responses of all the students who say, I wish I were you. And at the same time, brush off the acceptances, because really, you didn't get to your goal, which was to earn a full ride at every single institution. Number 4, there's 2 types of schools: top 20 schools and the Caribbean schools. People applying to medical school need to know that it's all or nothing. If their MCAT score was below 513, they should just give up. After all, if you're not getting into a top 20 medical school, you're going to the Caribbean as purgatory for not being accomplished enough as a pre-med undergrad. It was your fault. Number 5, DO is less than MD. DO is actually short for don't go to medical school. For the people posting on SDN about how they didn't quite have the scores that they needed and were thinking about DO schools, tell them that DO schools aren't real medical schools. Treat DO schools like the plague or like the coronavirus, and emphasize that DO candidates are less prestigious and less qualified to go to actual medical school. Then bring their families into it. Make sure that students who are considering DOs know that their parents are absolutely ashamed of them. And of course, that they should just not go to medical school altogether. It's the same thing anyway. Thanks, Ryan, for writing that wonderful article. And he brings up some real problems in the SDN community. Some of these threads are, truthfully, just negative and neurotic. While they may be annoying, it's actually easy to spot them. It's very clear when people are saying very egregious things. What I want to focus on today are the more dangerous ones, the ones that are a little bit more invisible and harder to spot. These are the threads that give you some of the story, but not the whole story, or the posts that give you some information that unfortunately is misinformation. Again, I'm not saying that there's an army of pre-med ninjas out to cut your throat, but I am saying that not everything on the internet you'll find is applicable to you, useful to you, or something that you should even read. One good example that disguises as really helpful information, but often isn't, are anecdotes. When one student shares what one thing worked for him or her, it can be difficult to remember that that one thing might very well not work for who you are. That's something that comes from a good place, but unfortunately can do more harm than good. Here are 7 dangerous pre-med myths that can be affecting the way you understand medical school admissions. Number 1, friends are temporary and GPA is forever. This is a big one. Across all the forums and all the posts across the internet, we really emphasize the importance of your GPA. It gets your foot in the door, and for students who have lower GPAs, it becomes extremely difficult to overcome that mountain. It's possible, but the odds just aren't in your favor. If you'd like to go into detail about how your GPA and MCAT score affect your admissions odds, you can find more in this video here. Now, there's 2 ways to kind of combat a low GPA. 1, recognize that medical school admissions is holistic and build around a lower GPA. Option number 2 is to change your GPA, and there are ways to do that. We'll start with number 1, building around a weaker GPA. Now, to be clear, if I had a GPA of 3.85, some students might think that that's an extremely high GPA, and some students might not. And how is that even possible? Well, the same applies to medical schools. Harvard might see a 3.85 GPA as a little on the lower end, whereas another school, like UC Irvine perhaps, might find 3.85 right in the Goldilocks zone. And yet another school, maybe some school in Iowa, might find a 3.85 GPA sky high. And so that brings me to the point: your GPA is high, just right, or weak, depending on the medical schools that you apply to. And so building a strong medical school list that's appropriate for your GPA and MCAT score makes a really big difference. In fact, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's the most underrated thing anyone who applies to medical school does. And if you wanna understand how strong your application is right now, right at this second, you can take this medical school chances quiz that I created just for you. It'll take in some inputs: your GPA, your MCAT, your shadowing, your clinical experience, your other extracurriculars, your life circumstances, your GPA trends, a conglomeration of inputs that are important to your medical school odds. And it'll spit out 2 things: 1, a grade, and 2, a medical school list that fits where you are at this current moment. It's a great tool to see where you're at, where you're headed, and how to get there. And if you're looking for that quiz, you can find it in the link in the description box below. Getting back to your GPA, there's another way to build around a lower GPA. Recognize that your GPA isn't the only measure of your academic abilities. There's also the standardized test, the MCAT. And a strong MCAT score can help buffer a lower GPA. In addition, not all GPA scores are made equal. A 3.85 GPA for me might look different from a 3.85 GPA for you. For example, I may have had a slow start, starting college with C's and D's just because the transition away from home was difficult for me. But after a single quarter, after 2 quarters, after a year, I really understood how to study, how to be back on my game. And from then on, second year forward, it's all A's, landing me at a 3.85 GPA just because of my slower start. That'll look different from a student who consistently gets B pluses, A minuses, and A's. Don't get me wrong, both of these are solid, strong students. But the first student looks to me more like a 4.0 student who just had a bad start. The second looks like a consistently 3.85 GPA student, consistently at that level. This is just to say that your trend for your GPA matters, and it's beneficial to see your GPA go up over time. Going to number 2, there are ways to actually change your GPA. Of course, you can take more units at your college, but there are also special programs, things like post-bac programs or special master's programs or just normal master's programs that can add a little bit more context to your GPA. You'll get more units, it'll actually change your GPA, and that new GPA is going to be reported on your medical school application. So remember, while GPA is extremely important, there are ways to build around it. And if you do need to change it, there are ways to do that too. So both friends are temporary, and so is your GPA. Number 2, there's only really 2 serious clinical experiences: Scribe or an EMT. Every pre-med and their mothers wants to become a scribe or an EMT. So much so that I know plenty of people who have gotten both their scribing license and their EMT license, but never worked as a scribe or an EMT. It's kind of weird, isn't it? You spend thousands of dollars on these certificates, hundreds of hours training, you take this big exam, and then you don't actually do the work. If you're confused, imagine a medical school admissions committee member who reads your application and is even more confused. It's not great for your odds if your admissions committee member is scratching their head, wondering, why didn't you become an EMT? And it's even worse for your odds if they ask you that question during an interview and your answer is, well, kind of just did it to put on my resume. Everyone is doing EMT or scribe work. I thought they were the only real 2 clinical experiences. Now, to be clear, I understand where people are coming from. Being an EMT, being a scribe, working clinical research, that all sounds sexy. It's great, it's big shot, it's the big leagues. But it's obviously not for everyone. Not everyone wants to work the nighttime shifts, and other people want different types of clinical experience. And to clearly define that, clinical experience is anything when you're spending real time interacting with real patients. And there are plenty of examples of this, from volunteering at a community health fair to a federally qualified health center like the Venice Family Clinic, or to delivering babies as a doula, or to working as an assistant in a hospice facility. The goal is to spend some real time interacting with real patients. Personally, I served as a medical assistant in a community clinic where I took some vitals, I called insurance companies, I translated for patients, I helped them figure out the bus schedules. That was great, solid clinical experience that every school on my interview trail wanted to know a little bit more about. And no, I wasn't riding in an ambulance or attached to the doctor's hip at all times. I was with the patients, understanding why they're coming in, what they needed, and what we could do for them. And if you can do that with any experience, that's a strong clinical experience. Number 3, if you don't have 12 to 15 extracurriculars, excluding all the honors and dean's lists and all those small trivial items, then you shouldn't apply to medical school. It's an auto rejection. Now, to be clear, it's going to be hard to get into medical school with 3 extracurriculars or 5, especially considering that you have to designate 3 of those extracurriculars as your most meaningful anyway. I do want to be extremely clear here though. Quantity is way less important than quality here. When you interview at medical schools, there's just not going to be enough time to go through all of your extracurriculars. There will be enough time, however, to really delve deep into 1 or 2 or 3 things that really define who you are. And if you have 15 things, but those 3 things that you decide to talk about, it isn't so clear that you actually care about them, then you're just going to come across as another applicant who just checked all the boxes, didn't really get involved with things that they truly care about, just put stuff on stuff on stuff on their resume, and voila. There's plenty, but none of them actually matter. The worst thing you can do is to have an admissions committee member think, please, I hope this person doesn't have another extracurricular for me to go through. You've lost at that point. So while you don't need 12 or 15 or any specific number for your medical school application, you do need to make sure that that piece of paper really represents who you are. And second, that that person isn't someone who does things to just check off boxes, do things to do them, not really care about any single thing. Number 4, if you didn't attend a top 10 undergrad school, you're heading straight to the Caribbean. In short, yeah, your undergrad does matter for your medical school admissions odds, but the relationship is kind of murky. While it's true that higher tier undergrads, something like a UCLA, does send more students to medical school than a lower tier undergrad, one clear confounding reason could just be that UCLA just has more pre-med students. In fact, every year, 1,000 of the 50,000, so 2% of all the pre-meds in the nation, come from UCLA. Now, it'd be great if we knew for a fact that UCLA students got in at 65% compared to the national average, which is 40%. That would suggest that UCLA students, maybe they do have an advantage. But we don't have that data, so it's hard to truthfully say. But to be clear, even if that were true, it's hard to make a real case as to why. It's a big chicken and the egg problem. Are medical schools taking more UCLA students because of the UCLA brand name? And is that because UCLA, as the #1 public institution in the nation, just happens to already attract higher quality students? And those higher quality students end up going to higher quality med schools? If I just told you that last bit, higher quality students go to higher quality med schools, you wouldn't have any problem with that. It seems pretty straightforward to me. Now, where the UCLA name plays in that calculation, no one is sure. So it's hard to say whether going to a top 10 undergrad really significantly changes your odds at admission. For most of you listening though, you'll already be in college, and that means that it doesn't matter what undergrad you go to, because unless you're thinking of transferring, you can't change your undergrad. And because it's not something in your direct control, there's absolutely no need to worry about it. There's plenty of other things in your application that you can physically and actively control. There's plenty of things that you can optimize, so don't spend time thinking about things that you can't optimize, that you can't change. Remember, the fundamentals of medical school stay consistent no matter where you're from. Your GPA, your MCAT score, your letters of recommendation, your extracurriculars, your personal statement, your secondaries, your interviews, your Casper, all of that is in your control. So don't worry about things that are not. Number 5, holistic admissions. The idea here is that because medical school admissions is holistic, you can get in with a low GPA or a low MCAT score. They have to consider your whole application after all. And yes, that is true. There are students every single year that get into medical school with a low GPA or a low MCAT score. And there are certainly students who don't get in despite having really high GPA scores and really high MCAT scores. But this is the point. Just because one student didn't get in with a 4.0 528 MCAT score and one student did get in with a 3.0 505 doesn't mean that this will apply to you. Medical school admissions is an odds game. An odds game with 50,000 players every single year. And when you're battling for a seat amongst 50,000 other people, you'll want to maximize your odds however you can. And yes, while your application won't automatically get thrown out if you have a 3.3 GPA, 505 MCAT, your odds do significantly decrease. You wouldn't want $1 million car with 5-cent tires, because those 5-cent tires is what's going to really break down that vehicle. Same with your medical school application. You don't want $1 million application just to have a 5-cent GPA. Because while you will be evaluated holistically, if they're going to throw you out for one reason, it'll be because you have 5-cent tires. And again, for a full discussion of how your GPA and your MCAT score affect your admissions odds, I go into the real data from the AMC here in this video titled Your Medical School Chances Are Higher Than You Think. Number 6, I should retake any MCAT score below XYZ. Some students will say you should retake anything below 510. Others will say you should retake anything below 515. Others will say you should retake anything below a 520. The number changes for every single student. Number 7, start every personal statement with a medical emergency. You're applying to be a doctor. So perhaps it makes sense for you to write about something as dramatic as medicine really is. Many students don't write the personal statement to answer the question truthfully or genuinely. Many instead choose to guess what they think the admissions committees want to read. It's two very separate approaches. The thing with medical emergencies is that for most of you, you won't be in the middle of it. You'll be a volunteer kind of far off in the corner, or maybe this will be your distant relative that you never really had contact with. And that makes sense. You're a pre-med student. No one is expecting you to hold a scalpel, push the meds, or order the nurses to figure out what to do next. It's not your job. The best personal statements answer the question truthfully. And let me be clear as to what that question is. Verbatim, it's use the space below to explain why you want to go to medical school. And if that has to do with a medical emergency, then by all means, weave that in, intertwine your narrative amongst that story, lift it up. But if it really doesn't, that's okay too. The best personal statement is the truthful one, not one that you think will impress an admissions committee member. All right, this was a super fun video to make. Each point deserves its own video, and eventually we'll get there. But for now, do make sure, especially because we're all citizens of the internet, that you take whatever you read with a grain of salt, whatever you watch with a grain of salt, including my videos. Now, if you still have some questions, like the video and comment them down below. I'll make sure to get to them. If you're looking for the best resources out there for other parts of the medical school application, I also have you covered on that. We've created a little community, something I fondly call the Hidden Premed Village, which you can find in the description box below, and I'll also roll a short video showing you what's inside. It's a resource database that I continually update every single week with real answers to real questions from real students, just like you. I also host weekly discussion sections for you to get your questions answered live. Check it out, and again, you can find the link in the description box below. All right, friends, if you enjoyed this video, I think you'll enjoy 2 more. One is the Your Medical School Chances Are Higher Than You Think. I'll put it up here. And 2 is the Everything You Need to Get Into Medical School video here. I break down every single thing on that application, and I think you'll find it helpful as well. Thanks for sticking through all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one. Take it easy. Oh, shoot, you're still here? Well, thanks for watching to the end of the video. And second, I was just working on this quiz. It's this medical school chances calculator. You just take a 10-question quiz, and at the end of it, you get your strengths, your weaknesses, and a customized school list. If you want to take it, here's the QR code. I mean, if that didn't work, here's a QR code as well. And then I'll also put the link in the description box below. Well, I'm going to go back to finishing the quiz, and I'll see you later.